It's time to start your morning by taking 5. Here's your host, Matt McMaster.
You're listening to Take 5, a quick 5-minute take on the biggest things happening in Nebraska sports. I am your host, Matt McMaster, and today we are talking about Nebraska basketball and their 116-114 double overtime defeat to the Ohio State Buckeyes yesterday. It was a massive, massive game for both sides. They both were sitting on the bubble. A win for either side kind of, I wouldn't say it would have solidified Nebraska if they won yesterday as an NCAA tournament team, but it would have taken a massive step, not only just improving the resume with a very nice away win, but also dampening the resume of a bubble team that you have to compete against. And they lost yesterday despite a heroic effort from Bryce Williams, 43 points, a single game record for Williams. Broke a 31-year record, which was previously 42 points. Yesterday was Nebraska's season in a microcosm. It really was. It was ups and downs, and times where you thought they were out, times where you thought they were going to take over, times where you're like, how the heck is this team still in this game? It had all of it. It had the drama. It had bad play. It had really good play. It had hope, and it had crushing defeat. And that's what this season has been. A hope to begin a 12-2 start heading into Big Ten Conference play. You beat UCLA. You're clamoring to be ranked. Then you go on the road. You play Iowa. You're up 15. It looks like it's going to be an easy win. Then they come back. They take a lead late at the end of the game. You have late-game heroics from Bryce Williams, and then you lose in overtime. You get run out of the building in overtime. It leads to a 6-game losing streak where we're saying that this team is cooked, and then out of nowhere, they go to the West Coast, and they beat Oregon on the road and Washington on the road, and they parlay that into a really good win against Illinois, and now you're saying, all right, they're back. They're firmly back in the picture, and then they lose to Penn State, and they lose to Minnesota at home, and they lose to Ohio State, and now you're back on this team is toast and this team is cooked, and it's kind of over, and that's just what the season has been, and it's just a roster, and what was so frustrating about yesterday was that yesterday was a basketball game, and we'll get into the officiating in a second, but it was a competitive basketball game against two teams with high energy who knew the stakes of the game, who both wanted to win desperately, and it went back and forth, and there were just great moments from both sides. And it was one of those losses where just singularly, you can kind of live with that. You're like, that's the game. That's the game. And there were some terrible calls. There was awful call at the end with the travel on the baseline out of bounds, and the rule being you can move in a 3-foot pod. The inbounder for Ohio State did not moved firmly outside of that 3-foot pod. Yet Kelly Pfeiffer, who did not have a good day as the referee, just was right there, did not call it. The flagrant foul on Bryce Williams, even after it was reviewed, was terrible. Connor Essegian, that out of how many times have we heard announcers or referees say, well, that's too close to call. There's not enough evidence to overturn that call. What was the original call on the court? Connor Essegian, I didn't feel like with the original call being Nebraska's ball, there was enough to overturn that. There was 2 taunting calls where I've seen way less called for technical fouls for taunting in college football, or college basketball rather, this season than what happened in Columbus. And so everything kind of went against the Huskers in that regard, and they competed, and they had their opportunities to put the nail in the coffin and beat Ohio State, and they couldn't take advantage of it. And that's kind of what the season has been about. But I just think overall, you singularly can live with that. You can singularly live with bad calls and high-energy play and competitive basketball, but that's not what this season has been for Nebraska. They have lost games this year, not because of basketball, not because it's the natural flow of the game, because they lack energy and they lack identity, and they just, you have their coach telling the media, telling the fans, we need to be grimy, we need to have more effort, we need to be a defensive team. I'm sure he's telling his team that, and yet we have so many times this season where they come out and they look lackluster, and they just don't have that passion. They don't have that drive to win these games, even though when they do have that drive, and we've seen it a couple times this season, they look like a damn good basketball team. And that's what's so frustrating. When this team plays with energy, they can beat just about anybody. Seriously, they can beat just about anybody. But the problem is for whatever reason, and We know some of those reasons with poor roster construction and clearly a lack of chemistry, but they just can't game in and game out tune in and dial in and put in that effort and lock in and win games that they should. And that's exactly the reason why they probably won't make the NCAA tournament. Well, I'm not going to say never, because you know what? This team very well could pipe up the energy, beat Iowa, go on a 3-game win streak in the Big Ten Conference tournament, and then they are in the tourney. But at the same time, it's just one of those things where it's so frustrating. And it's just, yes, you can point to them maybe not being that talented, maybe them not being that great of a team, them relying way too heavily on Bryce Williams and Jawan Gary, and I think they're all valid opinions, but I think that the loss yesterday and the losses before that have been so frustrating because they should have won yesterday and they couldn't close the door. And they should have won so many games in the past, whether it be USC and Rutgers and Iowa or Penn State or Minnesota. They should have won those games, or at least a couple of those games. And now you see the early season mistakes and just the whatever happened in that mid-year just kind of come up and bite you from behind. And that's what happened yesterday, and that's what's kind of happening when you look at their resume and just the things that haven't gone their way in late February and early March. And it's one of those things where you're hoping that they can string things together and maybe make a run in the tournament and win that elusive first ever tournament game. But after yesterday, I think they're a conglomerate of people who are ready for this season to be over for Nebraska basketball. That's been Take 5. I've been your host, Matt McMaster. Thanks for joining me.